Hey there, my name's Haley Carter, if we've never gotten to meet, and I'm the lead grow pastor here at Gateway Church. And that was a song by Jelly Roll, but it was sung by my husband, who is now formerly known as Bryce, and now known as B-Roll, which I don't know how I feel about that. I found out about it this morning at the arts meeting. But how often do you relate to the lyrics of that song? Maybe you really only talk to God when you need a favor, or you're like, man, things are going bad. And he wants to hear from you when that's what's going on in your life. But there's so much more of him. There's so much more for you. There's so much more available. God is present all the time, and he is ready to talk to us, nudge us anytime if we are listening. And in fact, on Wednesday this last week, it was Juneteenth. And I was spending time with the Lord just remembering Juneteenth and lamenting. Lamenting is this tool God has given us to just mourn and be sad when we remember hard things. And so I was just lamenting Juneteenth, that there were so many people here in Texas who were legally free, and yet they were living enslaved 2.5 years after their legal freedom because no one had announced to them their freedom yet. And as I was just thinking about this physical hardship and pain, I felt like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, I want to turn your attention to a spiritual reality. Those of us who follow Jesus, we have been set free because of his life, death, resurrection, and ascension. But how many of us live in spiritual bondage day in and day out? We don't live free. And the thing is, this freedom has been announced to us. When you come to church, if you listen to Christian podcasts, if you sing and listen to worship music, that's announcing this freedom, and yet we continue to be in bondage. And I'm not saying these things are the exact same, and I'm not belittling the pain of millions of enslaved people who were made in the image of God. But I think what God was trying to do that day when he just tapped me on the shoulder is saying, hey, there is a physical reality to bondage and slavery, and there is a spiritual reality. And don't belittle the spiritual reality in your life and in the life of Gateway. In this series and through these practices, God is announcing freedom. He's announcing rest, joy, replenishment. They're all available. The question is, will you take it? Will you grab hold of it and let it be something that brings you to freedom and living differently? So as we get started, I want to ask you a question here. When people come up to you and they say, how are you doing? How do you answer that question? Maybe you're having a good time, a good week, and so you're like, I'm doing good. Maybe it's a hard season and you actually answer honestly instead of saying okay, like we often do, and you say like, actually, it's a hard season. But I bet oftentimes you tag this phrase onto your answer. Something like, I'm just really busy, or life is nuts, or it's crazy, or man, this season is just really, really full. How often do you hear that? Maybe this week. How often have you said that? We as a society are really, really busy. This is just true about us. And I'm an introvert. And here's the thing about an introvert, if you don't know, we have to get away to have our energy refilled. So the fact that life is busy makes that a little difficult. And if you know me, you know that I have almost three teenagers, teenager and then a borderline like preteen almost. She acts like she's, 27, but close to teenager. So our lives are so full. So this last 4 or 5 months, here's what it looked like. 2 boys on high school basketball teams, of course, different basketball teams. So their practices and games were totally different nights. So basically every day of the week we were at the gym. In fact, I think we should have just pitched a tent and lived there. Probably would have saved us a lot of time. And then my daughter did a musical, which was awesome and so much fun. And we had to practice lines and get to practice and sing those songs over and 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 over until I was dreaming about these songs. That was really rough. Also, We had a family trip, which was so much fun. We did a college visit. We like to make healthy meals because we're trying to be healthy. But remember I said I have 2 teenage boys and they're constantly hungry, so healthy meals and filling their bellies, it's a really tricky balance. And I like to pour into the relationships in my life, so spending time with people. And I also have a job, and my husband has a job. And we have 3 drivers and 2 cars that we're trying to navigate that. That's really fun. So life is full. Oh wait, I forgot one thing. I also go to every home Austin FC game because it's the real football, just so y'all know. And it's our hometown team, Listos Verde. But my life is full. Beautiful, wonderful, crazy, full. So prioritizing space for me to just be and reconnect with God and myself, it's so important. And when I don't do that, I find myself busy, worn out, distracted, exhausted. How about you? Can you relate to that? Is your life full too? Where are you overscheduled, distracted, stressed out? Do you want a change? We all fill our lives consuming social media, being on the go with activities, entertainment. The hum of all of this activity can just wear us out. We all need time away. So what's the solution? How do we make space to just rest and recharge? And what do we even do when we get that space? That's what we're talking about in this series. Formational practices that lead us relationally to connect to God with our whole being. And the ones we're looking at today are ancient practices that maybe you don't know a lot about or you've never actually tried, but they're just as relevant today as they were when God instituted them. And it's Sabbath and fasting. That's what we're looking at today. So if you're here and you're just exploring faith, I want to tell you something. Sabbath and fasting are really for those who are following Jesus, but don't check out. Because I think as you listen in to the kind of rhythms God has set up for his people to flourish, you're going to learn a lot about the kind of God that you're exploring. So lean in. And for the rest of us, let's take a deep breath. Breathe in and out. And just get in a posture to receive, be challenged, and learn something that if you apply it, your life could be different. You could be more free, more joyful, more rested. I want to ask you a question. What makes you you? Like, what are all the things that make you you? Is it your mind, your body, your soul, your spirit, all those things? Well, when it comes to our faith, oftentimes we think only about our spirit, don't we? But did you know that your faith is meant to include all of you, physical and spiritual? In fact, talking about our bodies, Paul says this in Romans 6:12-14. Therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body so that you obey its evil desires. Do not offer any part of yourself to sin as an instrument of wickedness, but rather offer yourself to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and offer every part of yourself to him as an instrument of righteousness. God has brought us from death to life, and so we're to offer ourselves to him as an instrument of righteousness. But what does that term mean? That feels kind of loaded. Instrument of righteousness. What is this? Well, righteousness is a word that sums up the result of Jesus' work of redemption, making us right, bringing us back to God. And so this is our response, the way that we respond to that gift by living faithfully to God with our whole self. It's a way we bring his goodness and his righteousness into the world, his rightness. But be honest, do you actually on a regular basis think of your whole self as an offering to God? Or even as something could be used for him and his rightness in the world? I'm gonna guess you don't, and I don't always either. So we have a lot to learn here. And that's why God has given us these practices that help us. So how do we follow God with our whole being? Well, let's keep this question in mind as we just continue through this talk and we look at these 2 practices. One of the gifts that God has given us to engage our whole self is Sabbath. So let's start by asking this question. What is the Sabbath? Just basic. Well, the Sabbath is a practice that originated in creation. So in your Bible, the very first pages are Genesis. From the very first pages, this is something that God has instituted. Each day in creation in the Bible ends with this phrase, and there was evening and there was morning, the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, and on and on and on, until we get to Genesis 2, 1 through 3. So let's pick up there. It says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So what's missing there in the seventh day? Did you catch it? We didn't read all of it, so you might not catch it. It doesn't say, and there was evening and there was morning, the seventh day. Is that a mistake? Does it matter? Is it intentional? Well, here's something, just as a little tidbit for you. Anytime you're reading in scripture and there's a pattern that's repeated over and over and over, it's called a design pattern. When the pattern continues but one part stops, you're supposed to notice. You're supposed to go, why? What's going on here? So the seventh day, God rested, but that rest was actually a creation work. He was bringing rest into creation. He didn't rest because he was tired. It's not like he was like supernova, stars, sun, planets. I'm so tired, I need to like Netflix and chill. But that's not what happened, okay? It was because the work of creation was complete. And so the rest was an act of stopping and delighting in the creation. Did you know that? God rested to stop and delight in the creation. He created rest on that day, and he set this rhythm of work and rest for us to be followed, or for us to follow. And due to the fact that it doesn't have the phrase, and there was evening and there was morning, scholars think of this as like an open invitation. We continue in this seventh day of rest, and we are invited to live in it, working, resting in this rhythm. And it's also a foretaste of what eternity would be like if we would choose to live into this. But if you know the story, just a few pages later in Genesis, this beautiful design is shattered. And humans choose to go their own way on their own terms. But God knew, he knew that in this state of chaos that we would enter as humanity fell, that it would not lead to our flourishing. And so as the story unfolds, he gathers a people and he gives them instructions, which are called the law in the Bible. And it tells them how to be and how to relate to God. These laws direct the people to live in a way that reflected the nature of God and their design to the rest of the world. Taking one day a week to Sabbath where people would stop, rest, delight, and worship was a part of those laws. No other culture at the time practiced anything like this, and there's no evidence that any culture prior practiced anything like this. It was totally revolutionary. So why should we Sabbath? I mean, this is all well and good, but isn't it kind of ancient and old? Do we really need this? Well, I think we really do. Jesus was convinced we did. So I want to cast a vision for what's possible if you'd be willing to take up a Sabbath practice. The first thing is, Sabbath is a way to reflect or image God, because God rested. Exodus 20:8-11 says this, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor animals, nor foreigners residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So this is the first grouping of the 10 commandments that we find in the Old Testament. And the commandments were there to show the people how to live, how to be for their flourishing and to relate to him. And it was radically different than any people group around them. And it was a way that they would show the world what God was like. God was calling the humans back to how they were designed to be, how it was set up in creation to rest that had been shattered. And the law was intended to be like a lighthouse, leading them home to God. This was and is a commandment, and it's probably the most overlooked commandment because I don't see any of you running around killing people, murdering people, and being like, what? It's an old commandment. We don't need to do it anymore. So this is a commandment for us, but why? Why stop and rest and delight? Like, why do we need all of this? Well, because God did, and we are his image. Because in creating rest and entering into it, he declared creation complete. And now he, God of the universe, operates from a state of rest. God moves in rhythm, rest, unhurried, replenishment, joy. How about you? Do those words describe your life? Is that the way you move throughout the world? Look, if we're going to take God up on this offer to enter into rest and take a Sabbath, it's going to require trust because it means in 6 days, that's enough work. And one day we set it aside, we let God be God, and we actually stop and we rest. This instruction on how to live from a place of rest led the Israelites to fully enjoying God and his creation. God's intention in setting apart this people to reflect and image him and match his pace wasn't just for them. It's not like, oh, the Israelites are so special. No, it was that they were to be a people that brought blessing and invitation to the rest of the world to know God and enter into a relationship of rest with him. It's pretty incredible that that's what he was about. When we start a relationship with Jesus, we are also invited into a new way to be. We are a new creation. The New Testament says you are a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. God didn't want the Israelites, and he doesn't want us to adopt the anti-formational ways of this world that leave us exhausted. He wants to invite us back to the rest that he established literally at creation. It's in our design. The second reason to Sabbath is because it is resistance. So Deuteronomy 5:12-15 says this, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigners residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Does this sound familiar to what we just read? It's because this is the second telling of the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament. But there's something really different here. It's slightly different retelling. Did you catch it? No, it's not that it names oxen and donkeys instead of just saying animals need to rest. That is different, but it's not the important difference. In the first telling of the 10 Commandments, God is pointing out that we are to rest because it's how he created us and the world. In the second retelling, he's pointing out that we need to rest because he's talking to the Israelites, we're slaves. In verse 15, it says this, remember that you were slaves and God brought you out. For those who don't know the story, the Israelites were a people group who were put into slavery under the Egyptians, and it was oppressive. Really, really hard. And God miraculously, through a series of events, brought them out. And he doesn't want them to return again to a mentality of slavery, which is work with no rest. For us, we wear busyness like a badge of honor on our sleeve. And in our hustle culture, it actually feels like laziness to stop and rest regularly. But y'all, that is so far from the truth. It is a lie that sucks you in and wears you out. It's not how you were designed, and it's not how God set us up. We don't have to live that way. God wants all creation to adopt healthy rhythms. Even servants and foreigners were to be given a Sabbath. And this was crazy because in this culture, servants and foreigners had no rights. But I love this about God because he was like, in my kingdom and in my economy, you do. Everyone rests. I love that that was even in the law. In modern times, our busyness often is what leads us to become slaves to our work, to success, to our kids' activities, to our image, to social media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Setting up a Sabbath is an act of resistance against that busyness. Do you find yourself falling into the pattern of working without rest? Maybe you're on vacation and you're like, I'm just gonna check that email real fast or respond real fast. You're at work, you're at a dinner with a friend or family and you have your phone out, you have your notifications on. Do your patterns of relating look more like this world that sucks you in and makes you enslaved? Or do they look more like God and the rhythms he's set up? He operates from a state of rest. I'm gonna guess if you have a pulse in this room, in some way you have been sucked in and your rhythms don't look like God's. And you know what? Mine oftentimes don't either. So we have a lot to learn. So I think we need a Sabbath. So how do we keep a Sabbath? Well, a Sabbath is a 24-hour period where we prioritize stopping, ceasing from work, resting, and delighting. Delighting in God, his creation, and other people. And for many of us, Sundays is the day we do that, just because of our work schedule. But for some of us, because of our work schedule, we need to do it on another day of the week. The day does not matter. Hear me. The day does not matter. It's that we take it. I want to encourage you, though, if you've never done a Sabbath and you're hearing about this today and you're like, I've never heard this, start small. Pick an afternoon, 3 or 4 hours, where you set your phone aside, you stop anything that feels like work, and you redirect your attention to God. Here's 4 things that can help you on a Sabbath. They'll be on the screens. 1, stop anything that feels like work. I'm going to say that over and over and over again. Anything that feels like work is not allowed. It doesn't mean your actual job. Don't go out and pick weeds if that feels like work. If that feels like joy, do it, and then come to my yard. Stop anything that feels like work and let it go and trust God. 2, rest. I know this feels foreign to most of us. Rest. What replenishes you? Take a nap, read a book, go slow. Do things for the sake of enjoyment, not productivity. And this one is important. Rest from knowing. You don't need to learn anything that day. Put the social media and the media aside, maybe turn off technology altogether. And then 3, delight. What fills you with joy? Do that on a Sabbath. God has made us for joy. Do the things that fill you with joy on a Sabbath. And when you've done all 3 of these, it will make room in your heart to actually worship God. And then just a final note, this is something that's really awesome to do with other people. I know I have some friends who do a Sabbath meal a couple times a month with friends. So an awesome idea. For me, I'm still in process on this one. I know the beauty of taking a Sabbath. In fact, I do my Sabbath Friday morning to Saturday morning. And when I do it, I'm replenished. I'm refreshed. I'm filled with joy. I'm ready for my week. But so often I can get sucked into the whirlwind and I find myself running an errand, doing a chore, picking up my computer. And so I have a lot of room to grow here. I have so much to learn, but I've experienced the joy of a Sabbath and I know that it's so good. A Sabbath is really a fast from work, from frenetic pace, and from self-sufficiency. And that just leads us back into our second point, which is fasting. So the act of fasting. Let's ask the same question. What is fasting? Well, in the Bible, it is to voluntarily reduce or eliminate your consumption of food for a set period of time. Only in modern times has fasting become like elimination or abstinence, where we say things like, I'm fasting from social media, or I'm fasting from chocolate during Lent. Those are great ideas, but they're not what the Bible talks about as a fast. It was also a core practice of the early church until the Enlightenment. They practiced a weekly fast on Wednesdays to remember the arrest of Jesus and on Fridays to remember the death of Jesus. And fasting was a common practice among many cultures, not just the Israelites. So why do we need a fast? This is an ancient practice. Isn't it something we can just move on from? No, because our world has become disembodied. Sometimes we think about our soul or our spirit. Sometimes we think about our physical bodies. But we are whole beings, and we need practices that get our whole entire being back in touch with God. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20 says this, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own, you were bought at a price, therefore honor God with your bodies." Since our bodies are temples or dwelling places of God, we actually need practices that get our whole body back in touch with God. When we take the time that we would spend thinking about food, prepping food, eating food, cleaning up food, and then doing it again and again and again throughout our day, it actually leaves a lot of space open, a lot of space for us to turn our attention to God. It exponentially multiplies our awareness of his presence and even his voice in our life. Scott McKnight, a modern scholar he writes a ton of stuff. If you're looking for something to read, he's amazing. He says this, "Fasting is the body talking what the spirit yearns, what the soul longs for, and what the mind knows to be true." Do you feel like you don't hear from God? Do you feel like you don't know what you feel or think? Fasting can really help you quiet the distractions in your life and redirect your mind and your whole body towards God. There are 3 reasons I want to give us really quickly here for why fasting can really help us. So 1, it's a way that we can offer ourselves to God. Matthew 6:16-18, Jesus is talking here, and he says this, "When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head, wash your face, so that it will be obvious to others that it will not be obvious to others that you were fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." So notice here that Jesus doesn't say, hey, if you choose to fast. He's like, no, when you fast. So it's an assumption that those who follow him are going to fast. Also, this is not for others. It's not to walk around and be like, I'm so hungry today because I'm fasting, just really holy. It's not for other people, but it's something that actually can be done with other people. It's also a reward is connected to fasting. Did you catch that at the end? It says your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So what is that reward? Well, 1, it's connection to him. As Westerners, we're in a perpetual state of feasting. We say things like, you deserve it, you do you. If it feels good, do it. Or my son's favorite show, Parks and Rec, they say, treat yourself. Have you seen that show? But fasting is self-denial. And in that denial, we turn our attention towards our dependence on God. I want to say it again. Fasting is self-denial. And in that denial, we turn our attention towards our dependence on God. Enjoying food is good, but our culture lives in a constant state of feasting. And so when we stop the overindulgence, even for just a day, it helps our body and our soul to notice and realign with God's good. The second reason is that fasting helps us grow in holiness. As we stop our 24/7 mentality of take whatever you want, we make space for God to show us where we have gone in a way that is not good. And it leads us towards repentance and confession. Repentance is just like, I'm going this way and I'm gonna turn around and go the other way. Confession is, I realize I've done wrong and I'm gonna actually admit that and say that I'm wrong. In 1 John 1:8-9, it says this, if we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sin, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sin and purify us from all unrighteousness. Remember at the beginning how we talked about offering our bodies as instruments of righteousness? Well, confession is what we do when we realize that we have offered our bodies as instruments of unrighteousness or sin. We've gotten off track. The feeling of being hungry, it will actually surface some things in you, some cravings. Think about when you're hangry. What kind of person are you? Look to the person you came with and ask them, what kind of person am I when I'm hangry? Or if you didn't come with anybody, call somebody today and say, when I'm hangry, which if you don't know that term, it's hungry, which leads to angry. When you're hangry, what kind of person are you? I can tell you, I don't even know all of you. You're rough. You're really, really rough when you're hangry. But when we let those feelings, those cravings, those ugly things surface on purpose, and we actually bring them to God, then he's able to talk to us about them. He's able to actually say, yeah, let's look at that. What is leading to you doing that and behaving in that way? And then he's actually able to turn us back toward him and what he has designed for us, which is good. It helps us to grow in holiness. In fasting, we also amplify our prayers. It allows us to combat our sinful nature by combating the most basic human need or desire, which is food. And it spiritually sharpens us and in some cases accelerates the work of God in us as we align to his will. How? How does this happen? Well, just a really quick story. Jesus goes to visit some of his friends, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. You may know this story. Martha goes and does what she should do in her culture, which is prepare for the guest. Mary goes and sits at Jesus' feet. And Martha's like, no. I need some help. Send Mary in to help me. And Jesus' response to her is like what we sang earlier. He says to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. We sang that song, You Are My One Thing. Mary chose the one thing. Being with Jesus is the one thing that's needed. And in fasting, we can remove distraction and make space to actually be with God, because it takes a long time to think about food, prepare food, eat food, clean up food, and then do it over and over again. That's a lot of space it frees up for us. My husband and I, we actually began a fasting practice on Wednesdays a few months ago. We're joining in with the early church on Wednesdays. And you know what happened without even trying? Well, one, I'm hungry. But two, I notice God so much more. I can't help but be drawn to attention with him. Lots of things surface in me when I'm hungry because I get hangry, but I talk to God about them. I've worked through a lot of things. And you know what has actually happened is I look forward to Wednesdays. When I started this, never thought that would happen. So how could you get your body involved in your faith by trying out a fast? Well, one, kind of like Sabbath, I want to encourage you, maybe start small. Skip one meal. And in that time that you would have prepared food, eaten food, cleaned up, talk to God. Bring your attention to him. Let things surface. Or maybe you jump all in and you're like, I'm going all in. Sun up to sundown. That's how we do a fast. It's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Maybe you go all in. But I also want to speak to those in the room who have food issues, because in our culture, we have a lot of us who struggle with food. If that's you, don't involve food in your fast. Make your fasting more of an abstinence or elimination thing. Maybe you remove your phone from your life for a day or for a few hours. And when you have your brain tell you, like, I need that dopamine hit, grab your phone. Let the tension sit. Talk to God about it. Turn your attention towards him instead of your phone. So how's your connection to God? Do you find yourself wanting to know him only to wake up every morning, go about your responsibilities, make a few meals, get ready for bed, go to bed, wake up in the morning, and do it all over again, rinse and repeat? If that's you, these ancient practices were given to us by God to connect with him in relationship. From the beginning of time, God's desire for us to be in loving relationship with him, but we've become distracted and deformed by the hustle of our world. We need these practices to be free and fully alive. As we wrap up, I want you to think about what is possible. What could be true of you if you allowed yourself to develop a new practice this summer? Where are you busy where you could find rest? Where are you worn out that you might find replenishment? Where are you exhausted or distracted that you might find new life, new focus? Who might you become if you were to really take on one of these challenges? For us, as we close out, I want to point your attention to something that we have every single week. The Digging Deeper is an amazing resource that's written based on the message so that you can take something during the week and actually try out, practice what we're talking about. So the Digging Deeper this week has 2 resources. One is Practicing the Way. Practicing the Way is this amazing organization that's free that you can actually take practices and it breaks it down into 4 weeks and you can try them out. Do it with other people. Grab someone from your serve team or a group you're in or maybe a spiritual running partner. And they have one for fasting and for Sabbath. So pick that up. It's in the Digging Deeper. Try that out over the next 4 weeks. The second thing that's in the Digging Deeper is our fasting guide. Over the last month, our staff has been fasting for our students who are going to camp on Thursday. Are y'all excited? So we have been fasting on Mondays, praying through some guides for these kids that they would truly encounter God and be changed forever. And I'd love to invite you to join us. In the Digging Deeper, you'll find our fasting guide. Maybe skip a meal or put aside your phone for tomorrow, or maybe you go all in and you take the whole day to really fast and pray with us. If you're exploring God, your next step may not be fasting or Sabbath, but it is to keep exploring a God who has set up life as a human for our flourishing in rest. If that's you, there's a QR code on the back of your chair to our connection card. Let us know you're exploring faith. Let us be in conversation with you. As we listen to this song, band's gonna play a song for us. As we listen, here's my encouragement. Just stay in your chair. Don't start packing up. Don't start thinking about what you're gonna eat. I know y'all. I know how it goes. Just stay for a minute. And I want you to really wrestle with the tension that may be in you about the idea of fasting or Sabbath. Maybe about your busyness. Maybe it's still that song about only talking to God when you need a favor. Let that tension just sit and wrestle. As you listen to the song, I want you to ask yourself, what would happen if I were to try this out? And what is it in you that tells you, don't do it? It's not worth it. What's that tension? Actually wrestle with it and invite God into the conversation and let him give you a vision for what might be possible.